There is a new flip in Russia-Ukraine war. On 1st June, Ukraine in a meticulously planned drone offensive targeted Russian military air bases deep inside Russian territory. In an operation codenamed Spider's Web, Ukraine struck 5 major Russian air bases: Belaya, Dyagilevo, Ivanovo Severny, Olenya and Voskresensk. The strikes resulted in the destruction and severe damage of over 40 Russian military aircraft, including strategic bombers like Tu-95 and Tu-22M3, as well as A-50 airborne early warning aircraft. This accounted for approximately 34% of Russia's strategic cruise missile carriers, inflicting an estimated $7 billion in damages. The spurt in Russia-Ukraine conflict came on 25th May, barely a week before Ukraine attack, when Russia, in an unprecedented assault, deployment 298 drones and 69 missiles in largest airstrike since the full-scale invasion that began in February 2022. The attack resulted in 14 deaths and 70 injuries across 13 regions, including Kyiv, and targeted critical infrastructure, residential areas, and military sites. These escalations occurred just before new peace talks brokered by US and Turkey, scheduled in Istanbul, as Ukraine confirms that the delegation would be led by Defense Minister Rustem Umerov. The incident underscores heightened tensions and advanced military tactics ahead of diplomatic efforts to end the ongoing conflict. Why there is sudden escalation when peace talks are scheduled? Isn't intriguing? Today I am going to uncover a very well-guarded, real top secret on Ukraine war. The West says that it is Russia's hybrid war that threatens West's, particularly Europe's, security. A narrative of Russia's hybrid war in Crimea was said that Russia in 2014 occupied Crimea out of Ukraine without firing a bullet. And even today, Europe talks about Russia's hybrid threats. We may not deny or reject their apprehensions, but today I am going to present you something unimaginable, something that cannot easily be believed, a hybrid warfare that instigates, incites or provokes a nation to go to war. There has to have some motives, correct? So my careful analysis with facts and figures presents a completely different story. To come to the point directly, it was the deep state of United States of America that has secretly launched hybrid warfare against Russia with primary aim of targeting not only Russia but also its all-weather ally China and Europe that was moving in Chinese sphere of influence. Wonder why I am saying Europe? Please do watch full video to understand the full picture with perspective. Is current Trump administration also part of the hybrid warfare? No, not so blatantly and directly as was the previous administration. However, in the United States, government may change but not the American interests. And there is just one simple interest, and that is to keep America the most powerful nation in the world and maintain its sovereignty. So if we go back to the Russia-Ukraine war, the first question that needs to be answered is, who gains most from the Ukraine war? Is Russia a winner? You would say no. It has lost huge numbers of military equipment, soldiers, faced sanctions, and has put economy on the back burner. Second question, is Ukraine the winner? Obviously no. Lost territory, lost soldiers, civilians, cities come under huge debt of US and Europe. Then who is the winner in Russia-Ukraine war? Why Russia went to war if it is not gaining? Why Ukraine is still fighting and backed off from Minsk agreement? And the big question, if USA is not the winner, then why President Trump talking to stop the Ukraine war? And why would he start the global tariff war and ruffle feathers with own allies and friends? I'm going to answer all these questions with facts and figures and historical perspective. But for simplicity, two orders were challenged and changed. One is the global order and another one is space order. So without further ado, let's get started. In August 1939, Soviet Union and Germany signed a non-aggression treaty known as Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Under the secret agreement, Poland was divided into a sphere of influence between Germany and Soviet Union. In the beginning, Soviet Union was standing with Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler. When Hitler sent troops to Poland on 1st September 1939, Soviet Union also joined invasion of Poland on September 17, 1939 in a coordinated move with Nazi Germany. The Soviets claimed they were acting to protect the Ukrainian and Belarusian populations in eastern Poland, a region they considered part of their sphere of influence. In May 1940, the German blitzkrieg rolled westward and France was conquered in 6 weeks, mind you. However, with time, this alliance broke down and things took complete U-turn. Germany invaded the Soviet Union on 22nd of June 1941 under Operation Barbarossa, primarily due to a combination of ideological and strategic factors. Hitler saw the Soviet Union as a major obstacle to his expansionist goals in Eastern Europe and viewed its communist ideology as an existential threat to his own. He also aimed to seize resources and living space for German expansion. Soviet Union responded by implementing a scorched earth policy, mobilizing reserve armies and forging alliances with Britain and the United States to counter the German advance. The Soviet Union's scorched earth policy was directed to destruction of infrastructure and resources as the Germans advanced, to hinder their progress and prolong the fight. The Soviets also recognized their military, with Stalin taking direct control and shifting to a strategy of multiple offensives, though initially they faced heavy casualties. During World War II, after being attacked by Japan at Pearl Harbor in December 1941, USA declared war against Japan and joined World War II and fought alongside Soviet Union, Britain, France. China also fought against Nazi Germany, along with the United Kingdom, Soviet Union, China. The United States formed the Big Four of the Allied powers. With the defeat of Axis power involving Germany, Japan and Italy in World War II, USA and Soviet Union emerged as world superpowers. Along with UK, they pushed forward for formation of United Nations to prevent future conflicts. Representatives from 50 nations gathered in San Francisco and drafted the UN Charter, which laid the groundwork for the organization. The charter was signed on 26 June 1945 and the UN officially came into existence on 24 October 1945 after its ratification by the key nations. However, with breakdown of allied powers, the wartime alliances fueled by ideological differences and differing visions for the post-war world, particularly in Eastern Europe, marked the beginning of the indirect conflict called Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union. During Cold War, 33rd US President Harry S. Truman pursued the policy of containment through offering aid and support to democracies wanted to contain communist influence. This resulted in the form of NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed in 1949 as a military alliance between the United States, Canada and several Western European nations to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. The alliance was established to prevent communist expansion in Europe and was formalized with the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty on April 4th, 1949. So now the NATO, the military alliance, was representing the Western Bloc, whereas the Eastern Bloc led by Soviet Union formed Warsaw Pact Organization or WPO. The Warsaw Pact, the military alliance, formerly the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Mutual Assistance, was a collective defense treaty signed in Warsaw, Poland, between the Soviet Union and 7 other Eastern Bloc socialist republics of Central and Eastern Europe in May 1955 during the Cold War. To cut short, some of the major events of Cold War between Soviet Union and USA were marked by Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Wall's construction and the fall, the Korean and Vietnam Wars, the space race and the Soviet Union's dissolution. All through the Cold War, both Russia and United States strived hard to surpass each other in space. However, for a long time, Russia took the lead in space, whether it is the launch of the first artificial satellite Sputnik, sending an animal in space Laika, first man in space Yuri Gagarin, first woman in space Valentina Tereshkova, first spacewalk by Alexei Leonov, first space station Salyut 1 in 1971, first lunar impact Luna 2 1959, first moon landing soft of Luna 9 in 1966, first lunar rover Lunokhod 1 in 1970, first interplanetary probe Venera series to Venus 1961 onwards. However, during the Cold War, both nations tried to sabotage each other's space programs. Russia's Yuri Gagarin was dreaming to go to the moon and Russians were excited about it. He was the first man in the world to encircle the Earth in space. It was a great feat. However, before Russia could have sent Yuri Gagarin to moon, first man in space died in a mysterious aircraft crash on 27 March 1968. It was a major jolt for Russia. The very next year, on July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Apollo 11 lunar module pilot Buzz Aldrin became the first people to land on the moon. And the next day, they spent 2.5 hours outside the lunar module Eagle spacecraft while Michael Collins remained in lunar orbit in the Apollo command module Columbia. When Armstrong first stepped onto the lunar surface, he famously said, quote, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind," unquote. It was broadcast live to an estimated 530 million viewers worldwide. Apollo 11 was a major US victory in the space race by fulfilling a national goal proposed in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy, quote, "of landing a man onto the moon and returning him safely to the earth," unquote, before the end of the decade. During these years of conflict, both countries also saw cooperation and collaboration in space. In 1975, Apollo-Soyuz was the first crewed international space mission carried out jointly by the United States and the Soviet Union. In July 1975, millions of people around the world watched on television as an American Apollo spacecraft docked with a Soviet Soyuz capsule. The project and its handshake in space was a symbol of detente between the two superpowers amid the Cold War. Before we discuss further, most crucial aspect of a space race between two superpowers, let's jump onto how Chinese were playing in the Cold War. China's role in the Cold War is interesting because it did not just side with one bloc. It played a strategic realpolitik game between the United States of America and USSR. China used the rivalry between the two superpowers to assert its own independent path. Both superpowers saw value in engaging with China to prevent it from falling completely onto the other's sphere. Let's go into history briefly. Both Russia and China has a serious border dispute, and during Cold War in 1968 and 7 months long undeclared military conflict brought both countries to the rink of war near Damansky or Jianbao Island or Ussuri or Musili River. Chinese, who opened up their economy to the world and brought major reforms, were perturbed when often occurring border disputes. On the Warsaw Pact side, fissures started erupting due to internal pressures within the member states and a shift in Soviet priorities and consequential revolution of 1989. The fall of communism resulted in the collapse of most Marxist-Leninist governments in the Eastern Bloc that led to formal dissolution of Warsaw Pact on 1st July 1991 in Prague. The Soviet Union also got dissolved that year. The end of the alliance's 36-year-long existence signaled the end of the Cold War. People's Republic of China, who wanted to be part of the United Nations Security Council, was initially opposed by US. China, on the other hand, indirectly contributed to the erosion of Soviet global influence by splitting the communist world and forcing the USSR to divert resources. USSR from the beginning was in full support of PRC instead of Republic of China. Both superpowers, the United States and the Russia, saw value in engaging with China to prevent it from falling completely onto the other's sphere. As UN General Assembly adopted Albanian and Algerian Resolution 2758 on 15 November 1971, People's Republic of China, or the PRC, dethroned Republic of China, the ROC, or Taiwan. Now PRC started sitting in UNSC meetings from 23 November 1971. USA, after the adoption of resolution, started recognizing PRC in the United Nations. The US used China as a counterbalance to the Soviet Union in Asia. Deng Xiaoping, after assuming the power in 1978, spearheaded the economic reforms and opened up economy to the West. The policy shift from socialist economy to market-driven capitalist economy paved China way to progress. However, the need for peace and stability on border was never felt greater than in 2001 when China was pursuing for WTO membership that year. Then came the breakthrough. It was in July 2001. Both Russia and China signed a 2001 Sino-Russia Treaty of Friendship. Article 9 of the treaty was on a similar line to NATO's Article 5 and talked about immediate contact and consultations with each other if any one of them is threatened, so that threat can be eliminated or neutralized. The agreement gave a push to stability in both China and Russia, and Chinese could now focus more on economic development. 5 months later, in December 2001, China joined World Trade Organization and became the 143rd member of the WTO. China's GDP was growing but at slow pace until 2001. With WTO membership, Chinese economy got wings and there was a need for peace and stability for economic prosperity. In October 2003, both China and Russia finally resolved their border dispute permanently. China was granted control of Tarabarov Island, which is also known as Inlong Island, Jianbao Island, and around 50% of Bolshoi Ussuriski Island. In July 2008, Chinese Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov signed additional Sino-Russian border agreement that finally settled the remaining eastern part of the border. The rise of Chinese economy has been exponential since then, and USA started feeling the heat, threatened with facing Chinese challenge, and more so, both Moscow and Beijing will boast of their all-weather friendship. However, Russian economy will not flourish the way Chinese seen the rise. With overt covert way, Chinese got the West technology, it imbibed Russian technology through tech transfers and then reverse engineered them. Chinese have acquired Ukrainian defense manufacturing firms and started hiring the Ukrainian resources. It collaborated with Russia, North Korea, Iran and Pakistan to develop an ecosystem. It started developing hypersonic weapons, 5th and 6th generation aircraft. Russia, meanwhile, also grew in space power and developed hypersonic weapons, much ahead of the United States of America. The Vanguard is one of the 6 new Russian strategic weapons unveiled by Russian President Vladimir Putin on 1st March 2018. Kh-47M2 Kinzhal, the Russian hypersonic air-launched ballistic missile, was first tested in 2018 and has been operational since then. In March 2022, it was reportedly used in combat during the conflict in Ukraine, marking one of the earliest known uses of hypersonic weapons in the warfare. 3M22 Zircon, a sea-launched hypersonic cruise missile capable of reaching speeds up to Mach 9, entered service in 2022. Russia confirmed its use in combat, although specific dates and details remain limited. Voskresensk missile. On November 21st, 2024, Russia employed the strategic Voskresensk hypersonic missile for the first time in a strike on military industrial facility in Dnipro, Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin confirmed its use and indicated plans for continued testing in combat scenarios as a strategic weapon if US and UK continued supplying Ukraine with long-range missiles like ATACMS and Storm Shadow that have reached inside Russian territories. Russia is outraged by West providing military aid to Ukraine that is prolonging the war. When Russia demonstrated hypersonic capability, Russian secret weapons shocked the United States, as now the US air defense became vulnerable. US had no interceptor for such hypersonic weapons. Their hypersonic weapon development program was found to be years behind Russians. So in December 2019, US under Trump administration announced its Space Force, first ever space military force for outer space. This development set off the space military race as never before. Both countries pursued programs for active militarization of space. The Soviet Union developed military space stations under the Almaz program, equipped with 23mm autocannons for defense. These were experimental and not part of a deployed weapon system. Almaz program was followed by anti-satellite ASAT weapons program. The USSR tested co-orbital ASAT systems in 1970s, 80s that could destroy enemy satellites using kinetic impact. With Russia, US, China also developed top-notch anti-satellite weapon capabilities. However, in 2021-23, the US and allies accused Russia of testing Inspector satellites that could potentially act as weapons and were capable of approaching or interfering with other satellites in space. In February 24, the US intelligence community revealed that Russia was working on a space-based anti-satellite nuclear weapon. It was not yet deployed. Plan raised global alarm bells because it could threaten satellites and space infrastructure. Nuclear weapon in space. Both countries who were trying to outpace each other saw a new player emerging and taking the lead. The new kid on the block was China, a real and pacing challenge to United States hegemony. Now coming back to Russia and US space program. Post World War II, both countries collaborated on International Space Station. The ISS began in the 1990s, combining the American Freedom Program and the Russian Mir-2 project. Russian Roscosmos collaboration also included space agencies from Europe, Japan and Canada decided to jointly build and operate the ISS. However, this program is to end by 2030. Meanwhile, Russia's Roscosmos was growing its proximity with the European Space Agency for Mars missions, and both started working on Mars mission in 2013. However, geopolitical tension and COVID emergence led to delays on landing of Rosalind Franklin rover on Mars that was supposed to drill 2 meters into Mars surface to gather proofs of past life. Technical failure and corruption scandals in Russia were attributed to delays. United States, though discreetly, was wary of Europe collaborating with Russia for Mars mission, as USA with NASA and Elon Musk SpaceX was looking in for success to the extent of creating a Martian base and developing colonies on Mars. In December 2017, US President Donald Trump signed an order that directed US space program to send astronauts to the moon and eventually Mars. Vladimir Putin, in a 2018 documentary, pledged a Russian Mars mission in 2019, potentially aiming to beat SpaceX and other spacefaring companies. This was in response to Elon Musk's announcement of a SpaceX Mars mission sparking a space race. If Russia becomes successful in Mars mission ahead of US, that would greatly change the geopolitical dynamics, undermining US hegemony. The latest space race was preceded by Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity at Euromaidan in November 2013, involving a wave of large-scale protests that began in response to President Yanukovych's decision not to sign a political association and free trade agreement with the European Union, instead choosing closer ties to Russia. Euromaidan soon developed into the largest democratic mass movement in Europe since 1989 Ruch movement for its independence. Earlier that year, the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, had overwhelmingly approved finalizing the agreement. Russia had pressured Ukraine to reject it. On 21st February, Yanukovych and the parliamentary opposition signed an agreement to bring about an interim unity government, constitutional reforms and early elections. Police abandoned central Kyiv that afternoon and the protesters, they took control. Yanukovych fled the city that evening. The next day, 22nd February, the Ukrainian parliament voted to remove Yanukovych from office by 328 to 0. Yanukovych claimed that this vote was illegal and asked Russia for help. Russia described the event as a coup. Pro-Russian counter-revolutionary protests erupted in southern and eastern Ukraine. Russia occupied and then annexed Crimea, while armed pro-Russian separatists seized government buildings and proclaimed the independent states of Donetsk and Luhansk, sparking the Donbass War. Let me further elaborate this with perspective. Here, Russia, who recognized the Ukrainian sovereignty after the dissolution of USSR, did not want to move it away from its own sphere of influence and was wary of any membership of NATO to Ukraine. The very same reason because of which the Soviet Union fought the World War II, you must remember. USA knew the Russian red lines and very well understood that Ukraine could be used as proxy to prolong war with Russia to weaken it. That is why US initiated the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances in 1994. The US initiative was strongly supported by United Kingdom, and in 1994 Russia signed Budapest Memorandum, under which Ukraine gave up its inherited nuclear arsenal, the third largest in the world, in exchange for security guarantees from Russia, US and the UK. Can you imagine? UK never provided security guarantee, they never provided NATO membership, US never provided security guarantees to Ukraine, they never allowed NATO for the Ukrainian as a member, and Russia had invaded the Ukraine. So Ukraine, you understand, it was the big loser in Budapest Memorandum. As US military got winds of growing Russia-China ties and enhanced cooperation in hypersonic and space technologies, from 2012 onwards, American deep state started countering Russia through old tactics, impinging on Russia's security. In 2008, NATO promised eventual membership to Ukraine and Georgia. By 2013, NATO and Ukraine held joint military exercises codenamed Rapid Trident. Russia saw these as serious intrusion into its traditional sphere of influence. Meanwhile, US and NATO continued to build a missile defense shield in Europe. Key components were placed in Romania and Poland. Russia argued that this system could neutralize its nuclear deterrent, despite NATO's claims that it was aimed at threats from Iran. In late 2013, the European Union pushed for Ukraine to sign an association agreement under its Eastern Partnership initiative. Although this was an EU, not NATO, initiative, Russia viewed it as a part of the Western geopolitical strategy to pull Ukraine out of Russia's orbit. As told earlier, this contributed to the Euromaidan protest in Ukraine starting November 2013, which ultimately led to the 2014 revolution and Russia's annexation of Crimea. Amid these developments, NATO conducted more military exercises near Russia, particularly in the Baltic region and the Black Sea. Russia interpreted these as encroachment and provocations, while NATO and Ukraine were used to contain Russia and consequently China. Meanwhile, USA continued to expedite its space and hypersonic weapons program. It found that it requires rare earth elements, particularly those used to create strong magnets, are crucial for various navigation and control systems on spacecraft, which are essential for missions to Mars. The same requirement also felt for hypersonic weapons. Rare earth elements like neodymium and samarium are vital components in reaction wheels and control movement gyroscopes, helping to stabilize and orient a spacecraft. Dysprosium and samarium are used in high-performance magnets for actuators and motors, miniaturized sensors, gyroscopes, and accelerometers in inertial navigation systems. These systems must survive and function under extreme acceleration, heat, and pressure. Rare earth elements like yttrium, gadolinium, and europium are used in communication and targeting electronics, advanced radar systems, electronic warfare components, RF and microwave shielding. For thermal protection and high temperature alloys, rare earth elements are not the primary heat shield materials. Elements like cerium or lanthanum may be used as additives in high temperature ceramics. United States military industrial complex is the core of its supremacy in the world. To thrive, the defense industrial complex, besides other high-tech industries, minerals are critical need of US or for that matter to any country in the world. Ukraine was a major part of the Soviet Union's industrial and mining system. The USSR conducted extensive geological surveys, many of which identified mineral-rich areas, including rare earth elements, especially in Kirovohrad Oblast, Zhovty Vody, and Donbass region. After 1991, US and European geological agencies began collaborating with Ukraine to map mineral resources. The United States Geological Survey has published reports identifying Ukraine's rare earth elements reserves, especially monazite sands which contain thorium and rare earth elements. After Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, the US increased its geopolitical interest in Ukraine, not just militarily but also economically and resource-wise. In 2021, Ukraine and the United States signed a strategic agreement on critical minerals under the Biden administration. This included data sharing, investment, scouting, and potential supply chain diversification. The European Union also identified Ukraine as a potential alternative source for rare earth elements to reduce dependence on China. The NATO Science for Peace and Security program funded some resource and environmental projects in Ukraine, which also involved mapping and technological infrastructure, including mineral assessments. So now you would understand that this is not just the friendship or only border security that is driving the US, NATO, or Europe allies, but critical minerals are behind this. The United States-Ukraine deal signed on 10th November 2021 during the COP26 summit in Glasgow, Scotland, between US Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm and Ukraine's Minister of Energy Herman Halushenko was immediate provocation for Vladimir Putin to launch a special military operation to stop Ukraine falling away from its sphere of influence, because this would not only undermine Russia's security but would severely compromise its sovereignty. Amid rising Russia-Ukraine tensions, on 21 February 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia would formally recognize the Donetsk People's Republic, the DPR, and Luhansk People's Republic, the LPR, two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine, controlled by Russia-backed separatists since 2014. This recognition, however, violated international law, since these regions were internationally recognized as Ukrainian territory. Putin also signed friendship and mutual assistance treaties with DPR and LPR. On 22 February 2022, Russia's so-called peacekeeping troops moved in. However, these troops' movements were widely seen as a de facto military invasion, even though it wasn't yet a full-scale war. At this point, on 22 February, the fighting had not exploded yet, but a big war was now very likely. On early morning of 24 February 2022, the full-scale Russian invasion began as Putin announced a special military operation in Ukraine. Russian forces launched airstrikes across Ukraine, invaded from north Belarusian side towards Kyiv, east Russia and Donbass towards Kharkiv and Donetsk, south Crimea towards Kherson and Mariupol. Ukrainian cities were bombed and the full war started. Barely months after the start of the war, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines were blown off in 4 explosions. The leaks occurred in Swedish and Danish waters. With the explosions measured at a seismic magnitude of 2.3, the Nord Stream gas pipelines running under the Baltic Sea, built to transport natural gas from Russia to Germany, bypassing Eastern Europe. Russia blamed the United States for the explosions. A Ukrainian Special Forces officer was arrested, but Ukraine officially denied its role, claiming it lacks capabilities for such an act. The Europe, which was dependent on Russian gas supply, would now buy gas from the United States. A war that continued even after 3 years, even after 4.5 months after Donald Trump taking over the charge of his second administration. While he made his election pitch that he will stop the Russia-Ukraine war on day 1, Trump initiated the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. However, no major breakthrough till now could be achieved, despite Ukraine declaring a 30-day ceasefire and Russia a 3-day ceasefire for celebration of Victory Day. President Trump was even criticized for being soft on Putin, and the world had seen drama when Zelensky visited Oval Office. You would wonder, soon after leaving from Oval Office, Zelensky visited United Kingdom, the same United Kingdom who was behind the US in all these agreements, negotiations when it comes Ukraine. Russia is wary of US-Ukraine mineral deal is once again proved by the fact that Russian intelligence got wind that on 27th May, both US and Ukraine are going to sign the mineral deal. That alerted and altered the Russian mind, as it became clear that there is much bigger design and strategic game plan. Stopping the war is not the end game. The beginning of the end game is the mineral deal. End of the end game is to contain both Russia and China through entanglement in Eurasia and Asia. On April 30, 2025, the United States and Ukraine signed the Ukraine-United States Mineral Resources Agreement in Washington, D.C. This agreement established a joint reconstruction investment fund aimed at facilitating Ukraine's post-war recovery and granting the US access to Ukraine's critical minerals resources, including rare earth elements, oil and gas. The agreement was signed by US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Ukrainian First Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko. Following the signing, Ukraine's parliament ratified the agreement on 8 May 2025 with overwhelming support. The deal was seen as a strategic move to bolster Ukraine's economy and strengthen ties with the United States. Before the deal, when Zelensky visited Oval Office, Trump said that Ukraine owes to US approximately $500 billion in past military and financial assistance through future mineral revenues. This was a pivotal change, as earlier drafts had proposed that Ukraine's mineral wealth be used to compensate for previous aid. The deal ensures that both nations have equal say in its administration This fund is designed to reinvest revenues from new mineral and energy projects into Ukraine's reconstruction efforts, and first 10 years all the profit will go for this. So it is clear that during the Russia-Ukraine war, America's military-industrial complex earned profits from most of the military equipment it supplied to the Ukraine. The oil and gas which most of the Europe would buy from Russia has now moved to the US import. Now mineral deal also landed in US favor. Then what is the next objective? Helping Russia means helping China. Containing Russia means containing China. China is the pacing challenge for United States. All estimates of United States intelligence agencies suggest that China is likely to launch massive military invasion of Taiwan in 2027. As per the Taiwan Relations Act, United States federal law that was passed on 10th April 1979, after the US switched formal diplomatic recognition from Republic of China to People's Republic of China, US is bound to support Taiwan in case of a war between Beijing and Taipei. The West, including US, has been accusing China that Beijing is supplying Moscow the crucial military equipment. Iran and North Korea are other Russian partners that stood behind Russia through thick and thin. These all nations are anti-US, so if war stops and Russia wins, these nations under Chinese influence would move to China's support in taking over Taiwan militarily. So for containing China, US has devised a new Indo-Pacific strategy. US is known for changing allies and partners as its geopolitical interests get shifted. USA wants anyone against China to be in its fold. Those who are pro-China, it woos through trade and economic relations, or otherwise US agencies like CIA use hybrid warfare to realize its geopolitical game plan. Interestingly, you would recall that Vice President J.D. Vance was in India on 22nd February when Pahalgam attack took place. Soon after the short conflict between India and Pakistan, after India's precision surgical strikes on Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, both nations announced the ceasefire. President Trump on multiple occasions said that he stopped the war, saying, "I told them not to fight, but let's do trade. However, by and large, both nations' governments, due to internal politics, denied the Trump's claim. But what is the trade Trump was talking about? Some media reports claim that Trump administration has signed a deal with Pakistan on cryptocurrency that may profit Trump's family. Report mentioned that the deal was brokered by Pakistan Army Chief General, now Field Marshal Asim Munir. However, later reports suggested that strategic Bitcoin reserves set landed in soup after senior Pakistani officials told select media that cryptocurrency remains banned in Pakistan. So what is the trade that Trump was talking about? The trade is mineral deal, which US wants to struck with Pakistan as well as with India. There is already a running critical mineral deal with India. The United States-India Trust or Transforming Relationship Utilizing Strategic Technology Initiative was signed for a period of 7 years till 2030-31. However, the US face was exposed when Pakistan's Commerce Minister Jam Kamal told media that Pakistan and US exploring critical mineral deal. Pakistan faces a potential 29% tariff on exports to the United States due to a $3 billion trade surplus with USA under tariffs announced by Washington last month on countries around the world. Tariffs were subsequently suspended for 90 days so negotiations could take place. Pakistan has huge rare earth elements reserves in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. There has been Baloch insurgency and local secessionist groups launch attacks on Pakistani forces. In such circumstances, US mineral deal would mean Pakistan may allow US military boots on Pakistani soil. Moreover, China also has presence due to the BRI project, which is also known as China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The US mineral deal with Pakistan may mean troubles for India, as the United States may arm twist India in UNSC if Pakistan leverages USA on Kashmir issue. This is up to Indian government to read the developments in perspective. If Ukraine is United States proxy in Russia-Ukraine war, then Russia is China's proxy. Similarly, US would try to leverage India to behave as its proxy against China in Indo-Pacific, while China would certainly leverage Pakistan as its proxy against India. In any case, a conflict with Pakistan can leverage US only when two-front war happens. US has played to present itself as friend of both Ukraine and Russia. Similarly, if mineral deal materializes, it will present itself as friend of both India and Pakistan, while squeezing both to its own endgame plan. I hope you would like this investigative story. If you want to support our content, you may kindly do so by becoming our channel members. We look forward for your support. Thanks for watching National Defense. Bye for now.